I remember going to my first breakpoint in 2022, and the FTX collapse was happening, and I looked around the room and I said, these guys are never leaving Solana. So we went through this evolution of being this infrastructure provider in the background to being a full stack liquidity provider and full stack trading tool. And a big part of that obviously was expansion to perpetuals, which is where the partnership with Orderly came in. I think perps will always be interesting. I think generally people care less about owning the asset and they want to care about having exposure to the asset. 3 years ago, BlackRock was like, no, we hate crypto. So it's funny how quickly the world changes. So I'm very excited about, these big shots coming on chain. I don't know if you went to Solana Breakpoint, but it was some of the biggest TradFi heavy hitters on stage. I've been in this industry for 5 years, and these are the rooms that, us crypto people were shunned in. And now suddenly, we got the suits in the room.
Welcome back to the podcast, where we spotlight some of the coolest people and projects in the ecosystem. And today we're joined by Ben, CMO of Raydium. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. Great to meet you. It's great to be here in beautiful Cape Town. We've got a sick backdrop. It's great to be connecting with fellow crypto folks, and looking forward to this conversation.
So Ben, I've tried going through your LinkedIn and through your X and all the social platforms, and there's so much you have on your plate from years of experience and etc. Can you tell the viewers a little bit more about yourself, who you are, what you do, how did you end up with Raydium?
Yeah, absolutely. My career is sort of a tale of two halves. If you are anyone who's above the age of 30, and by now you probably guessed I'm above 30, you didn't start in crypto, you started in some other industry. So I spent close to a decade working at Fortune 50 companies, launching brands in different various parts of the world. I spent 8 years with Procter & Gamble, which was one of the top consumer goods companies in the world. And then I worked on Procter & Gamble brands, but under the roof of Berkshire Hathaway when they sold part of their business to Berkshire Hathaway. And through that experience, I learned a lot about how to build a brand with strategic intent. I learned a lot about how to operate within a matrix organization. I learned a lot about how to launch brands for different audiences, different geographies. It's one of the reasons why I ended up here in South Africa through various different expat assignments. Every time I wanted to quit this big corporate environment, they sent me to a new cool country, ended up launching brands there. So I'm very familiar with emerging markets. And, through that experience, I saw firsthand how sort of centralized financial institutions are failing people. Yeah. And that's when I got bitten by the crypto bug. I was here in South Africa running operations for Procter & Gamble for Sub-Saharan Africa. I saw how difficult it was to move money from one country to another. I saw how many people were being unbanked who didn't have access to the wealth and investment opportunities that the rest of the world or the Western world had. And then eventually I got really passionate about that. And I got more passionate about it than I was about, marketing the next detergent or shampoo line. Started investing in crypto, quickly realized how easy it was to send money to family and friends using borderless money, using Bitcoin, using various different altcoins. Eventually ended up working in crypto. Yeah. Most of my experience has been on the consumer product side. So I was marketing wallets. My first role was the VP of marketing at Bitcoin.com when they launched their own wallet. Obviously, it's a very strong domain name, so it got a lot of SEO traffic when interest in Bitcoin increased. And then, created a very successful wallet where you can trade, multiple assets, Ethereum, BSC, Bitcoin Cash, and Bitcoin. Eventually ended up at a wallet company called Exodus, which is one of the leading self-custody wallets. I always worked for self-custody wallets. I always believed that the future is on-chain. I always believe that you have to bet on inevitability. And I think the more and more people realize that self-custody and having sovereignty over their money is important, eventually on-chain is just going to take over. And as long as companies are focused on making it safe and secure, I think more and more people are going to move on-chain. I ended up at Raydium. Essentially, I was in a role and I felt a little bit sidelined. Yeah. And I was always very much attracted to Solana. I always felt like there was a lot of energy there. I always felt like Solana did a great job of onboarding normies, whether it was through NFTs or memes. They really had it was a good mix of good tech and cultural fluency. I remember going to my first breakpoint in 2022, which happened literally days before the FTX collapse. And the FTX collapse was happening. And I looked around the room and I said, these guys are never leaving Solana. They're going to be the last violinists on the Titanic. And one of those companies that did not defect from Solana despite all the turmoil that was happening around the FTX crash and the terror.
For those people who doesn't know what FTX crash is, can you just give a little bit of an insight and what exactly that is?
So the FTX crash, essentially, FTX was a centralized exchange, and what they were doing is they weren't managing their funds in a transparent way. They were running a market maker and an investment company called Alameda, and also a centralized exchange called FTX. There's a lot of commingling of funds. So wherever they owed money, they would move from one entity to the other, and it wasn't done in a very transparent. And that was sort of seen by all crypto investors, or the savvy ones, as sort of the failure of centralized exchanges, because they don't operate with the same level of transparency as companies like Raydium. Now, FTX had a huge exposure to Solana. One of the biggest investors in Solana. They held a lot of Solana. So obviously, when FTX collapsed, a lot of the confidence in Solana kind of disappeared as well, and it impacted the entire market, but it impacted Solana the most. For those of us that have been in this industry a lot, and you see, Solana prices now hovering above 100, 120, it went all the way down to 20. And I was there when that happened, and I saw all the people building in Solana, and I felt that these guys were going to stick around no matter what the price was. They're going to continue building because they believe that this chain is going to be the future.
Interesting. So just to stop you there again, like, obviously this is when you just got into crypto.
It was a few years after I got into crypto.
Okay.
Yes. So initially, I didn't have much exposure to altcoins. I was very much Bitcoin focused. And suddenly all these what we call alt L1s started to appear because, Ethereum, both Bitcoin and Ethereum had scalability issues. We're struggling with high gas fees. For those of you that have been in this industry a long time, there was massive network congestion on Ethereum. You sometimes had to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in network fees in order to buy an NFT. And that created the need for all these different new blockchains to spring up. And one of the early ones that sprung up was Solana. And Solana is high throughput, fast transactions, and it took off and became extremely popular behind the NFT craze. Initially wasn't designed as a chain for NFT trading. It was meant to be a DeFi chain. Yeah. And obviously with the whole NFT craze and everything, it became hugely popular. And the first decentralized exchange, or first automated market maker, so where you can provide permissionless liquidity and you can trade any asset, was Raydium at the time. Yeah. And I met, some of the Raydium guys at that break point. And, what was very admirable is, when Solana was seeing some of its worst days, they kind of stuck to their guns and they doubled down on Solana, and it's worked out really great for them. So I always found that, Raydium is this very resilient organization that just rolls with the punches regardless of market conditions. And I felt like there was a lot of energy there. I felt like a lot of the action was happening on Solana. Role opened up. They got very serious about owning the user relationship. They wanted to build out a marketing team. So it was a match. And 6 months ago, I joined them, and I haven't looked back since. And I'm very, very happy to be here as I'm working at the mothership of Raydium.
That's amazing. And while we're on that topic of Raydium, I'm sure there's a lot of other viewers might just check in now. But what is Raydium? Like what's the purpose? What's the mission and vision for Raydium itself?
Raydium is the first, decentralized exchange on Solana. So anything that needs to have a market, any asset that needs to be traded, is going to have liquidity on Raydium. It was the first one on Solana. Obviously, there has been since a lot of competitors that have sprung up, but we like to think of it as the home of liquidity on Solana. So anybody that wants to tokenize, anybody that wants to move assets or create value on the blockchain, and wants to be on Solana, and they want to be a successful project, we believe they should partner with Raydium. And we have a strong track record of really successful projects coming onto Solana, getting the right liquidity, getting the right support with Raydium. So I look at it as Raydium should be seen as sort of a sign of trust and a sort of a partner success. So we went through this evolution of just being this kind of infrastructure provider in the background to being a full stack liquidity provider and full stack trading tool. And a big part of that obviously was expansion to perpetuals,
Yeah.
which is where the partnership with Orderly came in. So now when you go to the Raydium site, you can not only provide liquidity, swap any asset that you want on the Solana network, we can also get exposure to potentially assets that are not traded on Solana or don't have liquidity on Raydium. You can get exposure through trading perpetuals with the Orderly integration. So we want it to be the one-stop shop for where people can make money and where people can get exposure to assets where they normally couldn't get on any other platform or any other competitor.
Amazing. And yesterday I went through some stats of Raydium, and I saw you guys actually like fully launched at the end of December. I mean, that's what, like just a little bit over a month ago, and like
Yes.
$400 million in volume in 30 days, and past 90 days was like over $1 billion in volume. It's crazy. How did you achieve that? Like, what was the main thing? I want to get into that a little bit later though.
Yes.
First of all, I want to just ask you about your experience in working with Fortune 500 companies.
Sure.
Going from that perspective of marketing into the decentralization and crypto companies, and then obviously ultimately Raydium. Like, what is the most important lessons you've learned along your way onto the end?
I think the most important lesson I learned is when you work for consumer goods brands that are very brand driven, brand is at the center of your organization and how you operate. If you are marketing, let's say, a Coke, or if you are marketing, let's say, an Ariel or Tide, detergent, it's really everything is centered around the brand. When you're talking in tech, in a D2C or in a crypto company, most of the early growth really happened without marketing.
Yeah.
So it was purely product led. It was literally, there was a very useful product that was very sticky. So I think marketing needs new habits in these types of roles. You really need to use the language that everyone else does. In product-centric companies, you don't need to just understand the brand and creative. You need to understand the data and the business impact. And then you really need to look at how you can do product-led marketing, changing something on your platform, creating a better conversion. So you need to almost kind of yield and understand that this is a product-led organization. You got to know your data before you know your brand.
Yeah.
That's very important.
Yeah.
So in my previous Fortune 50 companies, it was all about like, what does the brand stand for? You really you almost forced like, the supply chain and every other function to know what this brand stands for. It matters a lot less. What matters is your data, and you need to love your product.
Yeah.
Before you love your brand, and understand also sort of the internal customer as much as you appreciate the external. And it requires a lot more connecting the dots. So it's a bit more product marketing, and understand that what you do is going to be defined by your technical roadmap, and brand doesn't define the roadmap. It's really the tech that does that. So to me, that was the biggest shift. The other shift was that it's a completely different profile of consumer. So the whole marketing funnel still operates the same way. You have top funnel, middle funnel, lower funnel.
Yeah.
You have obviously a significantly higher user base on a fast-moving consumer good, and let's say the middle funnel is less important. In crypto, people are betting on these like highly sort of from the outside world. Us as crypto natives is not risky. We trust a protocol and everything like that. But people are, they're high value customers. They're willing to put hundreds of thousands of dollars into your protocol. You need to build that relationship in the middle of the funnel. So marketing involves, I would never DM a user in a Fortune 500 company.
Yeah, of course.
But I have, conversations on X, conversations on Telegram with people who do content for us, people who are brand evangelists, people who provide liquidity, people who provide feedback. So I'm having hundreds of concurrent conversations, because already with 5,000 to 10,000 users, you can potentially have a $10 to $100 million business in crypto, just because of how valuable that individual customer is, because of how much money they bring to the table.
So now that you've been with Raydium for a couple of months now, what has been the most positive aspect you've seen when Audley powered Raydium's perps, and when you guys launched about a month ago? Like, was there anything significant that you guys noticed, especially for user standpoints, and
Right.
obviously also at the revenue standpoints?
I think from a user standpoint, like the Solana DeFi space has become incredibly competitive, where basically every AMM or every launchpad wants to own the entire stack. It used to be, for example, back in, when pump funds started,
Yeah.
every single token that graduated on the bonding curve would seed liquidity to Raydium. So we had liquidity almost every single token. And now every single launch pad sort of, has picked their AMM. And I think one of the positive things, and also there's a lot of chains and, a lot of emerging assets that may not be traded on Solana. I think the most positive aspect is we had this user base that really, really trusts Raydium.
Yeah.
And having a perps integration allows them to still use Raydium and get exposure to assets that may not have liquidity on Solana. So,
Interesting.
so for example, a recent example, like when before Monad seeded liquidity onto Solana, and I think the future is going to be that seeding liquidity on Solana is going to be as important as listing on a centralized exchange. You're noticing a trend of like when a token has a TGE, they're choosing to at the same time of listing it on Coinbase, they're like, well, actually, we're going to get more trading volume on Solana as well, so we should also get listed there. So I think projects are getting better, but there were a few projects, especially at the beginning in our beta phase and everything, where you couldn't directly trade spot
Yeah.
on some of these assets, but they were available through our perps integration. And because there's this huge trust around Raydium, it being around, it having the deepest liquidity, being able to have exposure to assets that are not necessarily traded on Raydium proper
So it's
spot
really
exchange.
okay.
So, for example, Bitcoin, you can't you know,
Yeah.
you can't trade Bitcoin. So someone trusts Raydium to trade their Solana assets or to provide liquidity um, um, on Raydium for a certain pair, and they want to have exposure to Bitcoin. Without perps, they couldn't get exposure to it unless they used a separate tool because we're only available on chain,
Yeah.
right? Uniswap's available on every single Ethereum L1 and Ethereum L2, and they do about I think only like 2-3 times the volume that we do, and we're only on one chain. So perps gives us an opportunity for our users, and we've got quite a few. We've got a highly active user base that's very loyal, and now they're able to get exposure to these assets that otherwise they wouldn't be able to trade and get exposure to without the perps integration.
Interesting. So it's at the end of the day, it's just kind of building this whole community that your community members don't need to go somewhere else to go look for other things, right?
We want to be a one-stop shop for everyone to get exposure to, whether it's gold, silver, project tokens, different L1 assets. I don't know, you saw the announcement that you can now trade perps of silver and gold on gold. You can trade perps on Nvidia, Google, all these like major stocks that the good people here of South Africa, unless they're a credentialed investor and they hold a U.S. passport, cannot get exposure to.
Yeah.
So I think that there's this higher goal of financial inclusion of someone who lives a couple of blocks away here and happens to have a South African passport and wants to be part of that wealth creation that the U.S. stock market creates.
Yeah.
They can do that through either our tokenized equity partnership that we have with X stocks. So you're able to basically buy and trade tokenized versions of popular equities, or you can get perps exposure through the Orderly network as well. So we're trying to evolve from this sort of Solana-centric, very meme coin heavy trading environment to getting exposure to all sorts of assets. And we're seeing a lot of success of RWA assets. You're seeing a lot of L1 tokens that are getting lots of trading volume by just seeding liquidity on Solana and being able to be traded on Raydium because there's this sort of this huge trust and this brand moat that's been built up by being a successful protocol for 5 years. There's so many crypto companies out there that don't last 1 or 2 years. They
Actually want to
CGA.
like jump into that question next, right?
Right.
So as you know, Web3 is an extremely busy and fast-paced industry, right? What are some of the main drivers you've seen or noticed in other projects that might lead to unsuccessful startups, so unsuccessful carrying on into the long term, keeping that company running?
I think one of the pitfalls that I see is, chasing short-term narratives, chasing hype. I think a lot of projects, burn through their initial investment too quick. They over-index on influencers. They over-index on CT. Marketing doesn't only happen on crypto Twitter. I think the most important is see if you can get organic traction without having to pay for those users. There's, I've seen a lot of projects where, oh my God, there's a massive TDL growth and everything. And it turns out like, hey, they just paid a bunch of market makers money to park their money there. That's not sustainable. So the moment the incentives dry off, that money's gone. You see a lot of DeFi protocols giving insane yields. You'll never find like a 50-60% yield that's like 3x more on Raydium than on any other projects, because that's not sustainable. Because maybe they get some sort of reward injection and all that, and then you kind of get these like this incentive chaser behavior, what I call mercenary capital. The moment the incentives dry up, they move somewhere else. And if you're just going to pay for those users, you're never going to find out whether those users are going to be sticky. So it could be an airdrop that's very early, and those users, turns out they're airdrop farmers and they're not actually using your product for the right reasons. So develop a core user base, a core group of, and it doesn't have to be many. It can be like 500 to 1,000. That push comes to shove will never leave your platform, and you need to build a deep relationship with them. I think the biggest mistake these companies make is they assume they hit product market fit, but in reality, they just attracted a bunch of people who extract for a short period of time, and the moment those incentives dry up, they go somewhere else, and they're not using it for the right reason. So, time your TG right, time your airdrop right. Design it well, design that it rewards users. And that reward has to drive some sort of loyalty. So if I had to create a blueprint for the company, I would say, Hyperliquid is very successful because they made their core users ridiculously rich. And the company that, is able to continually create value for its most loyal users is the one that's going to keep sticking around.
So also just to touch base and like, okay, starting out, paying a bunch of KOLs to hype your product up. How do you see the future of KOL marketing or KOLs in general, especially with tools like Audley? You can launch your own exchange, right? You can launch your own financial platform, or with Raydium, you can launch your own tokens.
Right.
So like, how do you see that whole shift in the future of being able to launch your own product rather than KOLs going to other projects and hyping their project up?
Here's what I think about. Just be very clear on what you're using your KOLs for. Using is a bad word, but how you align yourself. I think some people over-index on top KOLs who are shilling lots of projects, and I think you need to treat them for what they are. If you need big voices to amplify momentum you already have and be sort of a megaphone, that's great. But I think the best way to use them is essentially have those sort of mid-size, rather go for, deeper relationships with not necessarily the biggest KOLs, but bring them on board, get them part of the beta, listen to their feedback, almost co-create the product with them. Convince them enough where they have some exposure to your project, whether it's through your token or everything like that. And once it impacts their bags, not just through direct payments of whatever you pay for this many posts and you have some sort of contract, but they believe in it enough where they actually invest their own money into it. It becomes like an organic and very strong sort of advocacy relationship, and that becomes a little bit stickier. What I see a lot of projects doing is they hire the same KOLs, and it's like, well, this KOL has done prediction markets, sports betting, and 50 different projects. And then, the audience is not stupid. They see through it. They can see through a sponsor, yes, whether there's enough heart in the message, because they're just taking a bag for every single project. And actually, they spread themselves so thin that they actually lose a bit of authority to talk about, let's say, well, you're talking about sports betting one day and tomorrow you're talking about perps. Exactly. Like, pick your battles and pick your area of excellence where you can speak with authority, and make sure you build that relationship and always kind of suss out if they really believe in your product. And if you're starting to convince KOLs to believe in your product, improve your product. So the first priority should always be product focus.
Interesting. How do you see the perp sector developing over time, especially now with tools like Audley One being able to, like, a few clicks and you have your on-chain financial system exchange up and running, generating fees, like how do you see the future of trading on perpetual exchanges?
I think perps will always be interesting because, I think generally people care less about owning the asset and they want to care about having exposure to the asset. Um, I think we see this with there was a whole trend around this governance theater where you can buy a piece of the token and then you can vote on what should be the future of like the protocol and everything. And people realize people don't actually want to participate. They just want to make money.
Yeah.
And the good thing about perps is one, you can trade with higher risk, but you can also, you can also make money when,
Yeah.
the market's going down. That's the beauty of perps. I think the way it's evolving is I think there's going to be a lot more markets. I love the fact that if there's a meaningful project that has done a TGE, within a day or two, a market is open on our perps platform, thanks to you guys. I think the the faster we create deep liquidity on all these markets, the more chance we have to be successful. We have to also understand that this is also a whale's game.
Yeah.
If you look at, for example, some of your competitors, there's like a small subsegment of wallets that are generating like 80-90% of the revenue. So
Yeah.
like the perps exchange that will do well is ultimately that's going to have the deepest liquidity. That's going to feel like a centralized exchange, going to have a good mobile experience.
Yeah.
It's going to have the best product, the most asset offerings. People can tell. I think, the perps experience on Raydium is excellent. It's instant settlement. It's one click. It doesn't have any of the sort of issues that the typical on-chain perps exchange. You used to have to, I remember trading on GMX. That was the big OG, and it was like settlement times weren't that great. You needed to have hold the gas token to execute it.
Yeah.
All these issues have been abstracted away, but we're still, operating and doing it on chain. So there's no custody risk. I remember using a centralized exchange for perps, and I wasn't able to withdraw for a couple weeks. There's
Oh, wow.
nothing more frustrating than not being able to withdraw your funds. So the pain is recent, and I think that after FTX, FTX was the most popular perps exchange. To go back to what I initially talked about, and a lot of people had their money stuck in there, and they lost their money, and now slowly they're clawing it back. But they still have PTSD from, a centralized exchange. They're not necessarily transparent with their liquidity, the on-chain settlement, and all that kind of stuff. There's always a risk, but you're not going to be able to take out your money. If it's on-chain, it's fully transparent. The money's always there.
Yeah.
I've always been able to take my money out of Radius perps exchange.
Okay, amazing. In the current market state, like what narrative are you most excited for coming in the near future, like short term? Like what's something people should look out for? Business opportunities, project opportunities, even trader and investor opportunities.
The most exciting thing I see that's different from the past is there's less of a stigma of bringing sort of real world assets and real securities on chain. I think, the conversations and boardrooms and everything didn't go as smoothly. And there's almost this openness um, to bring anything on chain and allowing people to have transparent exposure to it. Like, we recently had a partnership with Figure, for example, and you can get exposure through their Prime token to basically HELOC loans, which is like a loans against, it's essentially a most popular form of loan in the United States is to take out a loan against your home.
Oh, okay.
And that comes with a certain interest rate. You can actually gain that yield through Figure being tokenized on the blockchain. So eventually, for me, meme coins was always this kind of arbitrage, regulatory arbitrage, when there was unclarity in the previous administration of like what can be tokenized, what is a security, what is all that. Now that it's a bit of like, the guardrails are off, people are less cautious, and companies are now much more willing to, tokenize and put investment vehicles on chain. BlackRock's Biddle fund, fully on chain. And it's one of the biggest RWA providers. 3 years ago, BlackRock was like, no, we hate crypto. We hate crypto. So it's funny how quickly the world changes. So I'm very excited about, these big shots coming on chain. I don't know if you went to Solana Breakpoint, but it was some of the biggest like TradFi heavy hitters on stage.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, I've been in this industry for 5 years, and, these are the rooms that, us crypto people were shunned in. And now suddenly, we got the suits in the room.
Yeah.
But we also don't want to forget about who brought us to where we are, which is, you got the people in the hoodies, the people that were,
In the trenches.
in the trenches, and they're the degens. We don't want to forget about them, but we need to also accept that it's a new reality, and there's going to be all these cool projects. And actually, we're going to be a lot smarter investors. If we hedge our bets, we could still do the YOLO, investments into meme coins, but just, hey, here's a, publicly listed company backing this token that's going to give you a steady 7-8% yield. And we should be thrilled by that, because you're not going to find a TradFi equivalent of that.
Yeah.
So very excited about these projects, and there's a lot of great, cool projects that are coming on chain, and they're choosing Solana, and they're choosing Raydium.
Amazing. Amazing. Very, very interesting. And you just mentioned 5 years in crypto leads me into my next question. If you would sum up your past 15 years working with some of the best teams and high performing teams in growth and in marketing, what lessons did you learn? And how can we take that lessons
Sure.
and put that into actionable steps for someone who's viewing this?
I think the biggest lesson is, first of all, marketing is always changing.
Yeah.
If anyone claims that they're a marketing expert, they're lying, because you're never going to be an expert, because what worked a month ago is no longer going to work.
Yeah.
I think that understand that some of the best marketing ideas don't necessarily come from marketing people. So be open, talk internally, create a feedback loop from customer support, from ops people, from people who are in any way touching your product and with your consumers.
Yeah.
And just be open to be wrong. And sometimes the best ideas come from random conversation, or someone who's not necessarily on the operations side or the marketing side. The other thing is find your mentors early.
Yeah.
People you can have career discussions with, people you can get advice from. I think the most successful people in all teams generally have like a mentor as well. And just, build your network as much as possible. So get exposure to other marketing folks, other experts. And the more sort of alpha you get, like find like 5 or 6 trusted sources that you're constantly getting your education from, is going to be very, very critical. The best teams I've done are ones that are focused on winning externally and not internally pleasing.
Yeah.
I think the best teams are where, um, I think all decisions in the team are sort of they're not made at the level of no added value. So I've done my best work when I led at the speed of trust, and I understood where I can add value, when I cannot. The best teams I've built, where I built around my areas, my opportunity areas versus my areas of strengths. And we just kind of flow to where the work needed to be.
Yeah.
And be open to understand that just because someone's junior to you or whatever, learning is a two-way street. I've learned just as much from my direct reports and my team members as they have from me. So,
Interesting.
yeah, that's pretty much it. And, a high performing organization is going to be A players that are just going to, you don't have to tell them to do 110%. They have the internal drive. I can coach anything. The only thing I cannot coach is attitude. So the best teams I've managed is not necessarily the ones that were the finished goods and they came on board with all this experience and skills, but they came in with the right attitude and hungry to learn.
Yeah. No, I can think that's how everything works. I mean, if you just look at like some of these e-com guys on Instagram, like they like 16, 17 years old, and they just have that willpower of like they want to go out there, they go do that. And I mean, they're doing it, right? So 100% agree with you on like you have to have that willpower.
And I care less about now formal education, because I have seen guys who have learned more about crypto, who are more cracked about this industry, any other industry, e-commerce, who have not learned it through a formal education. They basically are self-taught.
Yeah.
So that always impresses me. So I think the value of formal education has went down, and I like this democratization of knowledge where, with the help of AI, with the help of all the tools that we have, you can really level up yourself without having to go to a university or all that. There's such a wealth of information available. And also, like, you'd be surprised how open people are to, especially in this industry, you just DM them and say, "Hey, I love your work. I'd love to have a chat with you." Um, I think this is the most like, especially I feel this in Solana and being at Raydium. Like, obviously, it's easy to get a call with anyone when you're working for Raydium, but people are always willing to help.
Yeah.
Like, they have this like rising tides lift all ships attitude. So that's been very refreshing. So
Amazing.
silent mouths don't get fed. You want to meet someone, you want to learn something from someone. You'd be surprised how many DMs get answered, and eventually people will give you their time.
That's amazing. And looking in the next 10 years ahead in the crypto and Web3 space, where do you see it? Especially now with like institutional players coming onto crypto, how do you see the whole world shaping around decentralization or Web3, like tokenized assets and so on?
I think we are still in this speculative era of crypto where primarily people look at it as a way to make money,
Yeah.
and just better financial management. But I think we're starting to inch towards more of the utility phase of crypto.
Yeah.
I'll give you a few examples. That where you get your driver's licenses in California. It's called the DMV. It's probably the most horrific place you can go to if you ever lived in California. You waited line for hours. But they put their entire system on the blockchain. And it's fully transparent, and they've actually created so much efficiency around the entire process.
Interesting.
You look at how, the fees on, sending stable coins versus like, processing transactions via Apple Pay or via credit card. It's incredibly more efficient. So I think we're going to see this whole trend of companies utilizing blockchain to make everything more transparent and efficient. And that's kind of where I see the future versus when now there's this perception of crypto that it's primarily a vehicle to make money, but it's actually also going to become a tool to make things a lot more efficient. If in the meantime it helps people create a better financial future for themselves, great.
Mm.
Um, what got me into this industry is creating financial access for everyone.
Yeah.
And I mentioned that, like, you know, 60-70% of the new wealth created on the stock market all went to US investors. And now with, integration of perps, integration of tokenized equities, anyone in the world, if you're sitting in Nigeria or anywhere,
Yeah.
you can get it. It's not just, 5 million NVIDIA shareholders in the United States that are going to get rich. Hopefully we all become more financially independent and we take control of our wealth. And ultimately that's going to create a lot more sovereignty.
Yeah.
And then I think that's where I see blockchain going. And that's the reason I'm in this industry.
Interesting. So like it all comes down to efficiency and cheaper fees and just like making
And just transparency and just, not relying on hoping that the centralized institutions in the country that you're born with make good decisions on your behalf.
yeah.
You make the decisions about your financial future and
Yeah.
therefore your personal future.
And I think just to end it off with the one last question, like obviously you are a very entrepreneurial sort of person.
Yes.
Like you grow companies, you scale companies, you jump around and help a lot of people. And obviously your main goal is to help people, right?
Right.
Um, where did all that start? Like, did you start in school? Like, did you start in university? When was that spark when you decided, okay, like I want to go into businesses and like monetize the heck out of that?
Yeah. So, I never in a million years thought I'd end up in marketing. I always thought like, like I went to university and I thought, okay, these guys who are into marketing are just like snake oil salesmen.
Yeah.
But then, I I ended up in roles where I like lots of autonomy to just build brands and create amazing stories around them and just help people realize that like these things can improve their lives. So that really is just what drives me. I've done various roles where I've come in, essentially looked under the hood, understand the persona, and understand how we can deliver more value to users. So that's really what my drive has been. And typically within 2-3 years, built out a good organization. And wherever I went, I've sort of felt like not only I left the company in a better place, but the people as well.
If you were to explain, if you're going into a business and you were to identify one specific thing you need to swap around or change around, like what is the first thing you normally go to in any business?
If I go into a business, I always want to kind of look under the hood,
Yeah.
kind of understand what's working, what isn't, understand the personas, understand who your existing customers are. I think what I like to do within the first month is at least like talk to 5, 10 people who actually use your product
Yeah.
and understand like what they like about it. And if I think ask important questions like if radium didn't exist tomorrow, like what would you miss the most?
Yeah.
And that helps you to sort of define your only statement and your value proposition and also informs on how to make the product better for those people. So,
Yeah.
um, and then immediately start just testing, build out short-term plans. Like what is going to have the biggest and fastest impact with the minimal investment? You
Yeah.
want to come in and get some quick wins. Um, keep building on what's working. Immediately identify what you want to start, stop, and continue. But don't cut things without at least figuring out 5 or 6 things you can experiment on the growth side and the marketing side. That's going to be very low effort, and you can demonstrate some impact immediately. And then you can sort of sharpen your marketing mix, and ultimately, you know, if you got a good product, it's your duty as a CMO and your duty as a growth person to get that to as many people
Yeah.
and get value out of that.
Amazing. And yeah, thank you so much, Ben. I really appreciate your time. And I'll link all his socials down below, so please feel free to go check him out. Amazing person, and send him a DM. You've heard it here, right?
Yeah. Feel free to DM me if you wanna, if you're potentially excited about being an ambassador for Raydium, you have any questions about Raydium, you want to connect with me, feel free to connect with me. And yeah, Daniel, thanks so much. It's great seeing you down here in Cape Town. I did fracture my wrist, so I'm going to shake your hands with my left hand.
Thank you
So,
so much.
but thanks for the great conversation, man.
Yeah.
Nice.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.